Empty folder, let's just walk through the steps, shout it out. What's the very first one? Starting a backend. Yeah, we make our package JSON, and then what file do we want to make? Cool. If I did the package JSON first, I just want to make sure that if I'm calling it server, I come in here and change the name of main to server. All right, what would be next? Morgan, Express, Mongoose. Nailed it. Is that all the dependencies I need for my backend at this point? Yeah, we already have Nodemon, it's global, so we're good. We can start developing. So I'll pull an Express and I'll make a server from it. I'm going to kind of run through the boilerplate here so we can get to the new content, but stop me again if there is any questions. The next section would be middleware for every request. This is where we're putting them for our servers right now. So we'll app.use express.json, and we'll app.use Morgan and its dev configuration. Since we've used that, we need to pull it in as well and require it. Well, what's the next section in our boilerplate? Yeah, DB connection. So what do I need to import to do that? Mongoose. And the method for that to connect Mongoose to the database is .connect through the MongoDB protocol on our localhost server 27017, and we'll call this booksDB. And then we give it the configuration object. I don't have it memorized, to be honest. Nor do I expect you to have that memorized. So we're just gonna go to our other project and grab that object. Here it is. Wonderful. So clean, so fast. And this is promise-based, so it comes back with two possibilities. .then, where we say console.log connected to the DB. And .catch, where there could be an error. Okay, we have a database connection. What's next on this list? Routes. Haven't done that yet, so let's just make a place for it. What is next? There's something else before the listen now. What's here? Global error handler. And it's an app.use, but what are the 4 arguments I need to give it, or the 4 parameters for it to know it's an error handling middleware? Error, rec, res, and next, in that order. Well, we like to see the error if it occurs. We're going to console.error the error, and all that console.error does is it makes sure that whatever is console logged is in red. It looks pretty when it's an object, an error object. And then we return a res.send of our own custom object, where we're going to call the error message something like error message, and set it equal to whatever the error message is that was passed into it. So that on the front end, every .catch gets the same looking object. Then we have our listen. App.listen, port, server is running on port. And we can go declare our port variable. And where do we pull it from first, or try to pull it from first? How do we refer to environment variables? .port. Or, since we don't have that, let's do something locally like 7,000. Once you get this boilerplate up, this is what you want to have to get started. Now, what is the only part of this we're going to change going forward when we build our app? Yeah, we're going to add routes, a route or routes, depending on how many models we have. So at this point, I would definitely note them on server.js and make sure our boilerplate is working. It looks like it is, so we can keep going. So first, we're going to talk about database relationships. We're going to have an author and a book model in this database. And what is that relationship, author to book? One to many. How do we know it's one to many? What's the definition of that? One thing has many other things where many other things have one thing. So the author has many books. But in this world, our books are only authored by a single author. So a book will only have a single author in this world. I know in the real world, books can have multiple authors. They're collaborative things. But this one, it's a strict one to many. So how many routes, how many models, and which do we build first? So I'm going to put my first two directories over here, the models and the routes. And which do I start on first, routes or models? Why models first? Yeah, we need the model for the first part just to write our routes. We need that variable, but also we should define our data before we define how to interact with the data. Let's see what our data looks like first and then define what the interactions will look like. So let's start off with our author.js. I'm just gonna go full screen here. Okay. Ooh, what do I need for a schema? It's mongoose equals require mongoose. And I don't want to have to say mongoose.schema everywhere, so I'm just going to say schema equals mongoose.schema. And then I'll make my author blueprint, my author schema. Before I forget about it, I'll make sure it's set up as an export as a mongoose model. And what would we call this model? Author, probably makes sense. And then author schema for what blueprint to use to make it. Okay, what are some, let's keep these objects simple because the focus isn't how complex can we make it. Let's focus on relating these things. So what would an author object absolutely probably need? Yeah, a name of some sort. Would we want to make this unique? Could we have two authors by the same name? That's the hard thing. It's like, I don't want duplicate authors, but what if two names is a normal thing in the world? So you just kind of have to deal with it in this point. Yeah. Or you'd have to get more information. Like if their name and their birth date are the same, that's too big of a coincidence. What else? A name. I think that's all we'd actually need. Yeah, how come I don't need to reference the books in here? Yeah, what, do I need to reference the books in here? Say, hey, you're going to have a bunch of books that belong to you. Yeah, I could say category. What is the, maybe they. Yeah, so what would we use to make the categories a specific string or strings? They have to choose a category. Enum. So you can be, fantasy or nonfiction or fiction or historical fiction. Is that a thing? Is that an oxymoron? Pretty sure it is. What's that? Alternate histories, and let's do sci-fi. Okay, and I think this is good for our author. Now, we don't need to teach the author you're going to belong to books because this is a one-to-many relationship, and the ID of the many gets the ID of the one, or the object of the many gets the ID of the one. So author doesn't need to know about their books. The books just need to know about their author. So we're done with the author model at this point. This is all we want to save. And enum says when I save a dot category in a post request, it has to be a string and it has to be one of these strings. If it doesn't match one of these exactly, it will reject the post request. We're not going to make it required in case they don't want to have a category unless we, it'd be fun too. Required true. We want some good data here. Okay, there's our author schema. But now we need to make our other model that this will relate to, and this will be our book model. So we can just go to the author and get the first 2 lines and say const book schema equals a new schema. And then module.exports our model called book using the book schema. Okay, so we have the author model and we have the book model. These are now 2 separate collections in our database. We're just defining what these objects would look like. What is something a book would definitely need? Title. That's going to be required for sure. Okay, what's another thing each book would probably want? Yeah, if we want to get more, we can do that. We'll just make that non-required. Pages. And we don't have to make these required. They're just like extra meta information if they include it. For the sake of this site, so we can look at certain methods later, let's do votes. We can't upvote or downvote a book on this site. We can a lot of people like this book. And instead of votes, let's say likes. And we'll just count how many people like it. So this will be a type number. And what would be a good thing to have likes? Should we make it required? What should we do with it? Default 0. I don't want to have to say start at 0. Let's just say every book that's added to the database starts off with 0 likes. That's simple enough. Then we can increment this as people click the like button. Okay, one more thing it will need. No, it could need that, but what does it absolutely need? It needs to know, it'll be given the ID, but it needs to know what author does it belong to. So I'm going to give it a .author. And the author, the type, will be a schema.types.object ID. And this is a specific data type in Mongoose that defines an ID for an object. So we could say string, but it won't work. It needs to know it's an object ID. And with that, we need to tell it what model is this ID coming from. Well, what model is author coming from? Author, that's the name of the model that the ID will be saved in this book. So the model this ID will be from is from our author model. So some author object in your database, their ID will be saved as your .author. And that's all we need to relate it. We typically want to require this so our data is consistent. Every book, we know who the author is. And there we go. That is what we need to do schema-based to set up a relationship, and that is it. From there on, it's just in the routes, making sure that whenever we post a book, we're able to add a .author to it before it's saved in the database. Because then all of our GET requests we can find by author. We don't just have to find by, pages. All right, now that I'm listening to it, it probably needs a genre. I get it. What would be a good thing? Yeah. Author / parameter for the author ID, or you'd say a book request. So / book / author / author ID with a colon. So find all books with a specific .author ID. Just saying find all books by this author. Well, genre would probably also be an enum, so we can keep it and we're getting really creative with this. Okay, that's all we have. It's a limited bookstore. All right, so 2 models. And again, does the author have any idea about the books it's written? No. The books will know which authors wrote them. And that's enough for us to be able to do a GET request and find all books, find author. Now, which one of these objects would have to be created first when I'm making a database? Author. Why would we have to make the author object first? We need their ID for when we do posting of the books. Yeah, exactly. So we'll create an author object, and then we'll create a bunch of book objects and add the author's ID to it. Right, so our models are done. We now need to define how to interact with this data. And we said, since we need to make authors first anyways, let's start with our author router. Author router equals an express router. And then we'll module.exports our author router. And what is one other thing I'm going to need to require into this file? What variable do I need to query authors? I need my model, right? This is where I'm going to say author.get or author.find, author.find1. So in my author router, I will say pull in the author model from my / models folder in the .author file. Okay. What would be a good request to set up very first just to make sure our database is connected and working? Get, because if it's working, what will we get back? An empty array. Author router.get / res and next author.find. We're going to just ask for all of them, so no filtering, just go look and then bring back either an error or the authors. If there was an error, what is the status we set? 500. And what do we return? No, neither of those. We changed this yesterday, next with the error. So that if it occurs, it'll pass this error to our error handler. It'll receive it, console log it, and send it to the front end. So every route will use this if it hits an error. All right, if there wasn't an error, then great. Return res.status of 200 and send the authors. Now we can test. The server's still running. So we'll pinch this down, go into Postman, and make a GET request to / authors. Will this or won't this work? The reason I'm asking is I know it's not going to, but why isn't it working? Why is this cannot get authors? What am I missing?
What does your server file look like?
That is an excellent question. What does my server file look like? I haven't told it where to look when I get a request to authors. Okay, app.use, when you get a request to authors, then use my author router file. Great, now it knows how to get, so we'll send. Empty array, it works. Also, Morgan is letting us know it worked. And all we're going to do with authors is a get and post. And then the books will do similar, get, post, and then get by author. So in our author router, let's create a post. Author router.post, / rec res and next. And what is the very first thing I do in a post request?
Create a new author, I guess.
Okay, I'll make a new object of whatever I'm adding. But how do I instantiate a new author object? Say new, and then my model name, new author, And what does it need to be given to know what to create? Rec.body. What is that? What is rec.body?
That's the quote when you pass down like an object.
When you send a post request or a put request, you send an object, that's what it's called. So we're saying take the object they sent in the post request, create a new author, make sure everything matches our schema. If so, generate the object, give it the ID, give it all its needs. So we can then do what with it? New author dot save. And we don't care about any criteria here. We're just going to say try to save it, come back with either an error or the saved author object that you just saved. Our error handling is the exact same, so we'll just, great. And then we'll return a res.status. And what is the status for additions or updates? 201.send the saved author. I know we're kind of speed doing this, so please slow me down if you're like, you lost me at line 2, because we're trying to get to the relationships and some of the new stuff. Is there any questions on this get all or this post before we test it? We've seen it 3 or 4 times now. Hopefully it's not as new looking. It's not too much code either. Okay, let's post. Post raw JSON. And where would I look to know what I need to send in this object? My author model. Okay, so it needs a name. Let's do what one? Oh yeah, this is the author, Dan Brown. And then what is his category? Ah, dang it. Okay, we're adding an enum. Historical. I said it was an oxymoron, but that makes actual sense now. So, and this is category is historical fiction. Now, if I misspell this, it will break because it needs the exact word. All right, we'll go ahead and post. Great. We have our first author, Dan Brown, who wrote Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons, which will be the books we add, and try to save his ID to the book object so they know they belong to Dan Brown. Good so far? Yeah. If it wasn't required, you could still send it. It just wouldn't have anything if you didn't send it. But you could still do a put request later and give it one. If it's in the schema, the object can have it, whether it's on the post or it's on an update. It knows that it's allowed. But I typically like to default anything that's not required just so it shows up and I know what I'm working with. Okay, we have our author. So now we need to define how to interact with our books. So we're going to make a book router. And the setup is very similar. We're going to pull this out, go to the book router. But what needs to change about our imports here and our variables? Yeah, so book router, let's pull in the book model from the book.js file, and let's module.exports the book router. Again, let's start with get just to make sure this querying works. Book router.get. And we'll say book.find, find all the books, send them back. If there was an error, let's set the status and send the error to our error handler. And if there wasn't an error, then it was successful and we'll return the successful status and the books. And we're all about testing, so now that this is set up, where do I need to go before I go test this? Server file. We learn from our mistakes, and we know that there needs to be another route for this file. So when you get a request to authors, go to that file. If you get a request to books, go to this file. And there's our first time using 2 endpoints. Awesome. So we could set up a get, post, put, and delete to this. We could set up a get, post, put, and delete for this, or whatever's needed. So now we can test this. Let's do a book, a get instead of to authors. We'll do a get request to books. Empty array. So we're good. Yeah, love the enthusiasm. Hey, next request. So this is we're finally to relating data. We did it with the model. We told the book that when we send a post request, you know, you can take all this, but you absolutely need to know who you belong to. So we're going to look at one way to do this. There's a few ways. Basically, we need to get the author's ID to the post request. So what is a few ways that, let's just set up the route here. And then I'll re-ask the question. What options do we have in sending the ID of an object to a route? How can I have this route receive the ID? 3 ways that we have. Rec.body, we could send it in the object. If we have the author ID on the front end, we can include it on the post request. The user won't have to do anything. It will just be added to the object when they send the request. So we could receive the author ID through rec.body. What else? There's two other ways to send data through a URL. Rec.params. What's one other way that we've sent key value pairs through a URL? Rec.query. So we have 3 options in sending data to the backend. 3 main ways. 2 of them include sending it in the URL, rec.params and rec.query, and 1 way includes sending it through the object itself. We're going to do it with params. So the post request will look kind of like a put request because it's going to have an ID in the URL. Totally fine. We're going to do this for the user. All they do is, you know, we click a button and the ID goes there, but we're going to test this in Postman. We're going to grab Dan Brown's ID and make a post request to his ID. So what do we do in a post request? Again, what was the first thing we were doing? Yeah, we were saying const, you know, new, whatever item it is a new book with rec.body. But does this have the .author yet? Does it have this data? Now, how am I sending that data? So I have access to it. I have rec.params.author ID, which will be the ID of the author, but it's not a part of the rec.body yet. So before I actually make the new book, this will fail because it will see it doesn't have a .author, and .author is required. So before I do this, what I'd say is rec.body.author should be equal to the author ID that was passed through the URL. And I'm adding it to the object the user just sent me in the post request. And then I'm saving rec.body now that it has everything included. So this adds the author ID to the rec.body object the user sent us, so it can be saved. End of sentence. So this is all we had to add to make sure it's related. We have to find a way to get the ID to the backend. Params, queries, or body will all work. I just chose params in this case. And then we have to add it to the object before we save it. Now we can save it with everything attached. And the rest of this is, as they say, the exact same thing. I don't know who they are. Return res.status. And what's a good status for this? 201. So quick. And saved book. And we have our post that relates to the author. So let's test it. I'm going to do a get request to authors to get Dan Brown from the database. I'll grab his ID. And now what's the endpoint going to be for this post request? Books / the ID of the author the book belongs to. So we're going to post this, and we should see this exact number as the .author of the returned object. Now we need to add stuff for the book name, so we're going to go check our model for that. We need a bunch of stuff, but for sure we need title and author. So let's fill in these keys here. Title, description, pages. He writes long books. Genre will be historical fiction. Do I need to send the likes? Do I need to send it how many likes to start with? Nope, it'll default to 0. Do I need to send the author? Nope, I'm sending that in the URL. Sorry, I don't mean to shoot you down. Just let's stop that thought right at its apex and move to the right one. This is the author's ID up here, and this is the book they wrote. So we're going to send this as the rec.body, and we're going to send this as the rec.params.author ID. The route will receive it and say add to the rec.body a .author equal to the rec.params.author ID. So it's tying that ID into the object. Then it's making a new book, saving it, and sending back the saved book. So let's post. Path title is required. What did I call it? Title. Oh, I didn't give it something. What did he write? Angels and, oh, that's a good one too. I'll do this one first. Description. Guy runs through historical places, frantically finding the truth, starring Tom Hanks. Okay, and we will send. There we go. Likes 0, ID. Whose ID is this? No, this is the book's ID. This is the primary key, _ID. Then we have the title, the description, the pages, the genre, and then the author, which is this exact number here, which belongs to Dan Brown. Let's post one more Dan Brown book. Da Vinci Code, right? Cadeau. And that's about the same. Yeah. This one was 2 pages less, and send. Okay, so we have 2 Dan Brown books. Wonderful. We do a get request to all of our books. We have our Dan Brown library. Related to him, notice that their author ID is the exact same number. So that we can now build a get request to say, find all books that have this specific author ID. So we build a get request for that. This one is for, all books. Let's write one that's for all books by a specific author. I'm actually going to do it up above this one. Book router.get to /books /author /:ID. We'll call this author ID. So this would be find all books by specific author. What is the method we would use, and what model would we be querying? Am I looking for books? Am I looking for authors? Stunning silence. We're looking for all books by a specific author. So we're going to say books.find. And we don't want to immediately say, give us back an error in all the books. We need to provide a first argument here. What is your filtering criteria? So we open up an object, and what are we most concerned about? What property of the book object are we looking for? Author. And what should it be equal to? rec.params.author ID. So as long as we can get the author ID into the GET request on this endpoint, it'll send back an array of books by this specific author, because all books were saved with the .author set to a specific ID. And since these will match consistently across books, it will return that subset.
Since there's not an actual param for author ID, how does it relate that to the
That's the param, colon author ID. Because of the colon, it's a parameter.
Just whatever is put in there, like after author as a parameter, in this case the ID, the request object is going to turn that into params and then author ID. It's going to say that inside of the params object under the author ID.
Yeah, if we call this ID, then it would just be rec.params.id. But we're querying books, so this makes it look like I'm looking for a specific book. I'm going to say, no, I'm looking for a specific author ID. I'm just calling the parameter something more of what it is. Res.status 500, return next with our error. And then lastly, return res.status 200.send our books. So we should be able to do a GET request to this and only get Dan Brown books. And this is contrived because this is all we have in our database, but we can still test it. So we're going to grab the author ID. We're going to do a GET request of /books/author. I'm missing something. Yeah, I was going to break it on purpose. No. / the ID of the author. I send GET. Books is not defined. Good. I was hoping we'd find an error today. Where would I look for this? Yeah, we know what route was triggered, right? Because I sent a specific endpoint. So something along the lines of what runs on this request has broken. And the problem is books is not defined. So here is our route. Where did it break? Yeah, it's book.find because I imported it as the word book. What about this books? That's fine. I gave it that name. Yeah. Okay. Now we can try a GET. And we get the subset from our database of just books that have the same author ID. And if I broke this, or didn't break it, I sent in a different ID, we won't get any Dan Brown book ones. It'll say, didn't find anything by that. It's actually an interesting error. Cast ouch ID failed for value. Oh, because it's missing a digit. It knows how long it should be. There we go. I didn't find anything with that ID. No books in your database have this ID. But the one that ends in 8 is Dan Brown. There we go. I'm going to stop this recording here.